They escorted me out of the office before lunch, but 3 weeks later, they begged me to come back at midnight. I was fired without warning, only for them to realize they'd forgotten who really controlled everything. When the phone rang at 2 a.m., I knew they were desperate. And this time, I wasn't coming back empty-handed. Have you ever been so underestimated that they shot themselves in the foot? Stay until the end of this story, because I'll show you how a termination became the leverage that changed everything. My name is Diana Maxwell, and I'm a 35-year-old senior data architect at Nexus Technologies. At least, I was until Marcus Webb, my direct manager, decided my expertise was expendable. The morning started like any other Tuesday, but by noon, I was carrying a cardboard box through the lobby while my colleagues avoided eye contact. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years ago, I'd walked into Nexus Technologies and discovered their customer management system was a complete disaster. Data scattered across departments, security protocols from the Stone Age, and integration so poor that sales couldn't even access current client information. Nobody asked me to fix it, and nobody acknowledged when I did. I spent 18 months after hours rebuilding their entire data infrastructure from scratch, created automated workflows that connected every department, designed security layers that would make government agencies jealous, built predictive analytics that increased client retention by 40%. Marcus took credit for every presentation to the board. But I didn't care about recognition. I cared about building something that worked. The problem started when the board brought in new blood. Jonathan Cross, a venture capitalist with zero technical background, but plenty of opinions about streamlining operations. He looked at our security protocols and saw unnecessary expenses. He looked at our data verification processes and saw time-wasting bureaucracy. We need to move faster, he'd say in meetings. All these authentication layers are slowing us down. I'd explain why removing those layers would be catastrophic. You don't understand the vulnerability profile we're dealing with. One breach, and we lose everything. But Jonathan had Marcus's ear, and Marcus had already decided I was an obstacle to his promotion. They started cutting my team, reassigning my projects, and questioning every security measure I'd implemented. When I protested, they labeled me resistant to change and inflexible. The final straw came during a board meeting I wasn't invited to. Marcus presented my quarterly security report as his own work, then immediately recommended eliminating half the protocols I'd designed. Jonathan supported the motion, and suddenly my 5 years of work were being dismantled by people who couldn't tell the difference between encryption and compression. I fought back, of course. Sent detailed reports to the CEO, Melissa Hart, explaining the risks. But she was new, brought in by the same board that hired Jonathan, and she trusted her management team. My warnings were dismissed as technical paranoia. The morning they fired me, Marcus couldn't even look me in the eye. He mumbled something about restructuring and new directions, while HR handed me severance papers. They gave me 20 minutes to pack my desk and surrender my access cards. But here's what they didn't know. I'd never fully trusted them. Every critical system I'd built had multiple security layers, and the deepest ones were tied to protocols only I understood. I'd created fail-safes within fail-safes, hidden authentication requirements that looked like standard code but were actually intricate puzzles only I could solve. As I walked out with my cardboard box, I wasn't angry, I was curious. How long would it take them to realize their mistake? The answer was 3 weeks. At 2:17 a.m. on a Friday night, my phone rang. Melissa Hart's voice was shaking. "Diana, we need to talk. There's been a situation." I sat up in bed, already knowing what had happened. "What kind of situation?" "We can't access the client renewal database. 10 of our biggest contracts are up for renewal next week, and the system won't let us in. IT says there's some kind of authentication error they can't bypass." I smiled in the darkness. "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" "This isn't a joke, Diana. We could lose 40% of our revenue if we can't process these renewals. Our competitors are already circling. I'm sure Marcus can handle it. He's been taking credit for my work for years." There was a long pause. Marcus says he needs you. He says you're the only one who understands the deeper architecture. Now I was fully awake. Put him on the phone. Another pause, then Marcus's voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it. Diana, I know we had our differences, but… Stop right there, I interrupted. Let me guess. The system is asking for verification codes that aren't in any documentation. The backup protocols are triggering security lockouts. And every time you try to override something, it creates another layer of encryption? Silence. Here's what's going to happen. I continued. I'm going to get dressed, drive to the office, and fix your problem. But I'm not coming back as your employee. I'm coming back as your solution. I arrived at Nexus Technologies at 3 a.m. to find half the IT department still there, looking exhausted and defeated. Marcus was pacing in the conference room while Jonathan Cross screamed into his phone about incompetent technical staff. Melissa met me at the elevator. Thank God you're here. What do you need? First, I need everyone except you out of the server room. Second, I need a contract drafted before I touch anything. And third, I need full authority to restructure this entire operation. Diana, be reasonable. You can't just waltz back in here and make demands. I stopped walking. Melissa, your 10 biggest clients represent $12 million in annual revenue. It's now 3:15 a.m. Your renewal deadlines are Monday morning. Without those contracts, you'll miss your quarterly projections, trigger penalty clauses with your investors, and probably face a board revolt. How reasonable do you think I need to be? She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. What kind of authority are you talking about? Complete oversight of all technical operations for the next 6 months. My own team, my own budget, and my own reporting structure. No interference from Marcus, no cost-cutting mandates from Jonathan, and no more security compromises. The board will never agree to that. Then you'll be explaining to them Monday morning why you lost 40% of your revenue because you were too proud to meet my terms. It took 2 hours of negotiations, but they agreed. By 6 a.m., I had a signed contract giving me unprecedented control over Nexus Technologies' technical infrastructure. By 8 a.m., I'd unlocked the client database and begun processing renewals. But I wasn't done. I spent the next week rebuilding everything they'd broken, restored the security protocols they'd removed, rehired the team members they'd laid off, implemented new monitoring systems that would prevent future unauthorized changes. Marcus tried to assert his authority exactly once. I was in the server room when he stormed in, demanding to know why I'd hired back people he'd specifically terminated. Because they're competent, I said without looking up from my laptop. Something you might want to consider. You can't just ignore the chain of command. I'm still your manager. I finally looked at him. No, Marcus, you're not. Read your contract. I report directly to the CEO now. You report to me. His face went white. That's not… Melissa wouldn't agree to that. Check your email. There should be an organizational chart in your inbox from about 10 minutes ago. He left without another word. Jonathan Cross was harder to handle. He had board connections and wasn't afraid to use them. He called an emergency meeting to discuss my overreach and demand limits on my authority. I attended that meeting with a presentation I'd been preparing for 3 weeks. Slide after slide of security vulnerabilities they'd created, potential breach scenarios, and financial liability projections. Then I showed them the improvements I'd made in just 1 week. System efficiency up 30%, security incidents down to 0, and client satisfaction scores higher than they'd been in 2 years. The question isn't whether I have too much authority, I said, looking directly at Jonathan. The question is whether you're willing to sacrifice the company's future for your ego. The board voted to extend my contract for a full year. Over the next month, I systematically dismantled everything that had made my original termination possible. I documented every process, cross-trained multiple team members, and created accountability structures that prevented any single person from making unilateral decisions about technical operations. Marcus tried to undermine me through office politics, spreading rumors about my hostile takeover and questioning my loyalty to the company. But his credibility was already shot. Everyone knew he'd nearly destroyed the company through incompetence and ego. The final confrontation came 6 weeks after my return. Marcus had been building a case against me with HR, claiming I was creating a toxic work environment and exceeding my authority. He scheduled a meeting with Melissa, confident he could get me removed again. I walked into that meeting with my own documentation, email chains showing Marcus had knowingly approved security downgrades against my recommendations, meeting notes where he'd claimed credit for my work, and performance reviews where he'd given me poor ratings while simultaneously implementing my innovations. The only toxicity in this environment, I said, sliding the documents across the table, comes from managers who value their egos more than their responsibilities. Marcus was transferred to a different department the next day. Jonathan Cross quietly resigned from the board 2 weeks later. But the real victory wasn't removing the people who'd wronged me. It was proving that expertise has its own power. And that power can't be terminated with a pink slip. 3 months after my return, Nexus Technologies was acquired by a major tech conglomerate for 3 times its previous valuation. The acquisition team specifically cited our revolutionary data architecture and industry-leading security protocols as key factors in their decision. I negotiated a retention bonus that was larger than my previous 5 years' salary combined. The day the acquisition was announced, I found myself in the elevator with Melissa. She looked exhausted but relieved. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have listened to you from the beginning." "You don't owe me anything," I replied. "You learned. That's more than most people do. What made you so sure this would work out?" I thought about that question as the elevator climbed toward my floor. I wasn't sure it would work out, but I was sure that my value couldn't be erased by someone else's insecurity. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped out into the hallway that had once felt like a battlefield. Now it just felt like work. Because here's the thing about revenge in the corporate world. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's making them irrelevant. I'd spent 5 years building something remarkable, only to watch lesser minds try to tear it down. They thought they could erase my contribution and claim my achievements. They thought expertise was replaceable and experience was expendable. They were wrong. The systems I'd built were more than just code and protocols. They were proof that competence matters, that dedication has value, and that the people who actually make things work deserve respect. When they fired me, they didn't just lose an employee. They lost their institutional memory, their technical backbone, and their competitive advantage. They learned the hard way that you can't replace knowledge with arrogance or substitute expertise with politics. My termination became their crisis, and their crisis became my opportunity. Not because I was vindictive, but because I was indispensable. The morning after the acquisition announcement, I walked into the office to find a resignation letter on my desk. Marcus was leaving the company, effective immediately. No explanation, no farewell email, just gone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Building something great takes years. Destroying it takes minutes. Rebuilding it takes everything you have. But the process teaches you something valuable. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by what you can accomplish when you stop letting them define your value. I kept the resignation letter as a reminder, not of victory, but of responsibility. The power to build or destroy systems doesn't come from your title or your connections. It comes from your competence and your commitment to using that competence ethically. 6 months later, I was promoted to Chief Technology Officer. The board created the position specifically for me, recognizing that Nexus Technologies needed someone who understood both the technical and strategic aspects of their business. My first act as CTO was to implement a policy requiring technical review for all major system changes. No more arbitrary decisions by non-technical managers. No more security compromises for short-term gains. No more sacrificing long-term stability for quarterly bonuses. The policy was nicknamed the Maxwell Rule by the development team. I didn't discourage the name, because sometimes the best way to prevent future injustices is to make sure everyone remembers what happened when someone tried to commit them. The phone calls stopped coming at 2 a.m. The emergency meetings became routine planning sessions. The crisis management became strategic development. And I learned that true professional revenge isn't about getting back at the people who wronged you. It's about building something so valuable, so essential, and so well protected that they can never make the same mistake again. The cardboard box I carried out of the office that Tuesday morning contained personal items, family photos, and a few technical manuals. But it didn't contain my knowledge, my experience, or my ability to solve problems that no one else could solve. They thought they were firing an employee. They were actually firing their future. And when their future collapsed, they had to hire it back at a premium. That's not revenge, that's just market value. The last time I saw Marcus, he was cleaning out his desk while I was reviewing architectural plans for our next major system upgrade. He looked up as I passed, and for a moment, I thought he might say something. An apology? Maybe, or an explanation. Instead, he just nodded and went back to packing. I didn't stop to gloat or offer false sympathy. I had work to do, systems to build, and a future to secure. Because that's what competent people do. They build things that last longer than the people who try to tear them down. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very skilled, you get to watch those things outlive the small minds that tried to destroy them. The elevator doors closed behind me, carrying me up to the executive floor where I now had an office with a view of the city. Through the windows, I could see other buildings, other companies, other people building their own systems and fighting their own battles. Some of them would face the same challenges I had. Some would be underestimated, undervalued, and eventually terminated by people who didn't understand what they were losing. But if they were smart, and if they were patient, and if they built something truly indispensable, they would learn what I learned. That the most powerful revenge is simply being too valuable to stay gone. The phone on my desk rang. Another technical crisis, another chance to prove that competence matters more than politics. I answered on the second ring, ready to solve whatever problem they'd created without me. Because that's what I do. I fix things that other people break. And I make sure they remember why they need me to do it.